It was a crisp autumn morning in Atlanta when Olivia Carter, a young, determined black woman with dreams of soaring high above the clouds, stepped onto the tarmac of her first commercial airline job. At 27, Olivia had worked tirelessly to achieve this milestone, enduring years of rigorous training, sleepless nights, and countless rejections simply because of the color of her skin. The aviation industry, long dominated by men and predominantly white, was not eager to welcome someone like her into its fold. But Olivia had never been one to back down from a challenge. She had spent her childhood gazing at the planes that roared over her grandmother's house, vowing that one day she would not just fly them, she would master them. Her first day at Falcon Airways, a regional airline with routes crisscrossing the southeastern United States, was supposed to be a triumph. Yet, as Olivia approached the crew lounge, clutching her freshly pressed uniform and a bag of flight manuals, she could feel the weight of every stare. Her colleagues, many of whom had been flying for decades, were clearly unprepared for her presence. The whispered comments were impossible to ignore. "Is she really a pilot?" one man muttered. "Must be some diversity hire," another said, his voice dripping with disdain. Olivia kept her head high, pretending not to hear, but the sting of their words settled deep in her chest. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was there. To prove to herself, her family, and every young girl who looked like her that the skies had room for everyone. Her first assignment was to co-pilot a short flight from Atlanta to Birmingham alongside Captain Richard "Rick" Thompson, a seasoned aviator with over 20 years of experience. Olivia had read about him in the company's newsletter, an accomplished pilot known for his no-nonsense attitude and sharp skills. But as soon as she introduced herself in the cockpit, it was clear that Rick wasn't thrilled about sharing the controls. He barely looked up from his pre-flight checklist, his responses curt and dismissive. "Just follow my lead and don't get in the way," he said, not bothering to mask his skepticism. Olivia felt her stomach churn, but she forced a professional smile and nodded. The flight itself was uneventful, a smooth journey through clear skies. But Olivia's every action was scrutinized. When she adjusted the throttle, Rick questioned her technique. When she radioed air traffic control, he interrupted to correct her phrasing. By the time they landed in Birmingham, Olivia's nerves were frayed, but she refused to let it show. As the passengers disembarked, one young girl paused to peek into the cockpit. "Wow, you're a pilot," she asked Olivia, her eyes wide with wonder. Olivia crouched down to her level, her smile genuine this time. "That's right," she said, "and one day you can be one too." The girl beamed, and in that moment, Olivia knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days following Olivia's first flight were a blur of rigorous schedules, tense interactions, and whispered conversations behind her back. Each morning as she donned her uniform and laced up her polished black shoes, Olivia reminded herself why she was doing this. The dream she had nurtured since childhood, the sacrifices her parents had made to support her education, and the generations of barriers she was determined to break were all riding on her shoulders. However, the reality of her situation was impossible to ignore. Her colleagues avoided her in the crew lounge. Conversations abruptly halted when she entered a room, and assignments with her name on the roster seemed to come with a sense of dread from her assigned captains. Despite it all, Olivia kept her head high, her determination unwavering, though the isolation gnawed at her spirit. One particularly challenging day, Olivia was scheduled to co-pilot a flight with Captain Douglas Crane, a man infamous for his sharp tongue and rigid demeanor. Before they even stepped into the cockpit, he made his opinions known. "I don't have time to babysit," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Olivia swallowed her indignation and focused on the task at hand, determined not to let his prejudice define her performance. As the flight progressed, she executed every maneuver with precision, handled communication with air traffic control seamlessly, and ensured the passengers experienced a smooth journey. Yet Captain Crane's dismissive attitude persisted, his grunts of disapproval punctuating her every move. Midway through the flight, a sudden turbulence rocked the aircraft. While Olivia remained calm and followed protocol, Captain Crane's flustered reaction surprised her. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure of how to stabilize the plane. Olivia instinctively took over, adjusting the controls and guiding the aircraft back to smoother skies. Once the turbulence passed, the cabin returned to normal, and Captain Crane sat silently, his face betraying a mix of embarrassment and begrudging respect. By the time they landed, he muttered something that almost sounded like an acknowledgement. "You handled that well," he said, avoiding eye contact. Olivia didn't respond, but the small victory gave her a flicker of hope. Perhaps actions would speak louder than words, even in the face of such ingrained biases. That evening, as Olivia sat alone in her apartment, she replayed the events of the day. For all the challenges she faced, she couldn't deny the progress she was making, however small. Each successful flight, each moment of professionalism in the face of hostility, was a step closer to changing perceptions, not just for herself, but for every aspiring pilot who would come after her. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her mother, a simple yet powerful reminder. "Proud of you, Liv. Keep flying high." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she clutched her phone. Tomorrow was another day, another flight, another opportunity to prove she belonged in the skies. Olivia awoke early the next morning, the sunlight streaming through her window a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. The challenges of the past weeks weighed heavily on her, but her mother's message still echoed in her heart. Today was another chance to prove herself. Her schedule included a round-trip flight from Atlanta to Charlotte with Captain Jessica Sterling, one of the few women in the company, and someone Olivia hoped might be an ally. Jessica had a reputation for being firm but fair, a consummate professional who valued skill over anything else. As Olivia entered the crew lounge, she spotted Jessica reviewing the flight plan. Taking a deep breath, she introduced herself. Jessica gave her a once-over, her expression neutral, before nodding and motioning for Olivia to sit. As they prepped for the flight, Jessica's demeanor was markedly different from Olivia's previous captains. She didn't pepper her with unnecessary critiques or dismiss her capabilities outright. Instead, she asked pointed questions about Olivia's approach to various scenarios, engaging her in a dialogue that felt like genuine mentorship. For the first time since joining Falcon Airways, Olivia felt like a peer rather than an unwanted guest in the cockpit. Their conversations ranged from technical procedures to the unique challenges women faced in aviation. Jessica shared stories of her own struggles, recalling how she had fought tooth and nail for respect in an industry that often dismissed her. "It's not easy," Jessica admitted, her eyes fixed on the horizon as they cruised at 30,000 feet. "But every time we take off, every time we land safely, we're proving that we belong here just as much as anyone else." During the layover in Charlotte, Olivia and Jessica grabbed a quick lunch at the airport cafe. As they talked, Olivia felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the weight of proving herself alone. Jessica's support, however subtle, was a lifeline in an otherwise isolating experience. But their conversation was interrupted when a male pilot from another airline approached their table. His tone was condescending as he addressed Jessica. "Still fighting the good fight, huh? Must be exhausting," he said with a smirk. Jessica didn't miss a beat. "Not nearly as exhausting as dealing with outdated attitudes," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Olivia couldn't help but smile. For all the challenges ahead, she now had a model for how to navigate them with grace and strength. The return flight to Atlanta was uneventful, but filled with meaningful exchanges. Jessica encouraged Olivia to trust her instincts and to let her skills speak for themselves. "You're here because you earned it," she said as they descended toward the runway. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." As they taxied to the gate, Olivia felt a newfound sense of confidence. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone. The day ended on a high note, a rare moment of peace in her turbulent journey. But Olivia knew this was only one step in a much longer flight path. The next day, Olivia was scheduled for a solo flight from Atlanta to Miami, her first opportunity to command the cockpit on her own. It was a milestone she had dreamed of for years, but it was also filled with anxiety. The fear of making a mistake, the pressure to prove herself, and the harsh reality of the eyes watching her every move all seemed to converge. As she prepared for the flight, Olivia stood outside the hangar, her hands gripping the flight bag that had become her constant companion. She had trained for this moment, studied every manual, and performed countless drills. But today was different. She was about to take control of an aircraft, not as a co-pilot, but as the captain. As she entered the cockpit, she ran through the pre-flight checks methodically, her movements precise and confident. She reminded herself that she had earned this opportunity. She was capable, skilled, and well prepared. But as she communicated with air traffic control, her voice faltered slightly, and she could hear the tone of the controller shift. Olivia had become all too familiar with the subtle, dismissive undertones that came with being a black woman in a predominantly white profession. She steeled herself and pushed through, giving the controller the necessary information with clarity and authority. This was her moment to shine, and she couldn't afford to let anyone's doubts make her second-guess her abilities. The flight to Miami was smooth, and Olivia's confidence began to build as she made her way through the various stages of the journey. She maneuvered the aircraft with precision, handled in-flight turbulence with poise, and communicated effectively with the ground crew as they prepared for the landing. Yet despite her professionalism, Olivia couldn't help but feel the weight of the eyes on her when she arrived at the airport. She parked the plane and secured the cabin, the familiar anxiety creeping back into her chest. It wasn't just about the flight. It was about proving to the world that she, a black woman, could belong in this space. As Olivia stepped off the aircraft, her mind was racing. She was greeted by the crew that would be flying the next leg of the journey. Their reactions varied. Some with a simple nod, others with a look of surprise that barely concealed their skepticism. Olivia tried to ignore it, but the silent judgment stung. It wasn't until she entered the crew lounge that she found a moment of solace. There, sitting alone at a table, was Captain Jessica Sterling. She had completed a separate flight that morning, but had come to check on Olivia. "How'd it go?" Jessica asked with a warm smile. Olivia exhaled, the tension in her shoulders dissipating. "It was good," she said, though she could feel the weight of the unspoken judgment still lingering. Jessica nodded in understanding. "You did great. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." For the first time since starting this journey, Olivia felt like she truly belonged. As Olivia made her way back to Atlanta, the weight of the past few days settled in her chest. She had navigated the complexities of the cockpit with professionalism, but outside of it, the battle against prejudice continued. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle exclusion from her colleagues, it was all still there, always lingering. Yet, there was a growing sense of resilience within her, a quiet strength that began to take root. She had shown herself capable of commanding the aircraft, of handling every challenge that came her way. And for the first time, she wasn't just performing for herself. She was performing for every woman and person of color who dreamed of stepping into this male-dominated world. She was laying the groundwork for a future that would be less about overcoming barriers and more about simply existing in the space she belonged. When she returned to the hangar after the flight, she found herself face-to-face with her supervisor, Charles Weber. He had been one of the more vocal critics of her early days at Falcon Airways, his comments often veiled with the kind of polite condescension that made Olivia's skin crawl. But as he approached her now, there was something different in his demeanor. "Captain Williams," he said, his voice measured. "I've been reviewing the flight logs, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. Your handling of today's flight was exemplary. Keep this up, and you'll go far." Olivia froze for a moment, her mind racing. She had been expecting more of the usual dismissive remarks, not praise. "Thank you, sir," she said, her tone careful, not sure if she should believe what he was saying. It wasn't until later that evening, when Olivia sat alone in her apartment reflecting on the day, that the weight of his words truly sank in. Praise from Charles Weber was something she had never anticipated, and yet it was a testament to how far she had come. The journey she had embarked on was never going to be easy, but each victory, no matter how small, was a step toward breaking down the walls that had once held her back. The reality was that Olivia wasn't just challenging the expectations placed on her by others, she was challenging herself. She was learning to trust in her abilities, to face adversity head-on, and to rise above the biases that sought to define her. The next day, Olivia found herself preparing for another flight, but this time, something was different. As she walked through the hangar, she noticed a group of male pilots talking amongst themselves. One of them, Greg, a seasoned pilot who had always been friendly but distant, caught her eye and gave her a nod. "Hey, Captain Williams," he called out. "Just wanted to say I watched your last flight. You've got some serious skills." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had received such direct recognition from one of her male colleagues. It wasn't just the technical acknowledgement. It was the validation that she had earned her place. The fact that Greg, someone she had respected since joining the airline, had taken the time to offer such praise meant more than she could express. As she walked to the cockpit for her pre-flight checks, Olivia felt something shift within her. She was no longer simply trying to prove herself, she was owning her place in the aviation world. With every flight, every interaction, and every challenge she faced, Olivia was growing stronger. She was no longer waiting for the world to accept her. She was demanding that it do so. The truth was that the skies had always been hers to conquer. And now, more than ever, Olivia was ready to soar to new heights. The days that followed continued to test Olivia's resolve, but each flight she completed seemed to cement her place in the aviation world. The subtle exclusions and quiet skepticism of her colleagues had become less frequent, replaced by a quiet respect that she hadn't expected. On one such flight, Olivia was paired with Captain Robert Harris, a seasoned pilot who had once been one of the more dismissive of her abilities. She had heard the rumors. Robert, though highly skilled, had a reputation for being difficult with women pilots, often questioning their competence. But when they met in the crew lounge before their flight to Dallas, Robert surprised her. "Williams," he began, his tone uncharacteristically respectful. "I've been following your progress. You've got the chops, no doubt about it. Let's make sure this flight goes smoothly." His words were simple, but they meant everything to Olivia. For the first time, she felt like she had earned her place not just through her skills, but through the recognition of those who had once doubted her. The flight to Dallas was a testament to Olivia's growth. She executed every maneuver with precision, communicated flawlessly with air traffic control, and handled in-flight turbulence with a calm professionalism that was becoming second nature. Robert, who had initially been a skeptic, now watched her with a new sense of admiration. As they approached Dallas-Fort Worth for landing, Olivia took the controls with a sense of ease that surprised even her. This was no longer just about proving herself. It was about showcasing her true potential. She had always believed that her abilities as a pilot spoke for themselves, and today, that belief was more evident than ever. When they touched down on the runway and taxied to the gate, Robert turned to her and nodded approvingly. "Well done, Captain," he said. And for the first time, Olivia truly believed it wasn't just a polite acknowledgement. It was respect. The recognition from her colleagues continued to grow, but it wasn't just about the validation anymore. Olivia had come to realize that her journey was bigger than herself. Every time she soared through the skies, she wasn't just breaking down barriers for herself. She was creating a path for others who would follow. Her success, her resilience, was becoming a symbol for every woman, every person of color, who had ever dreamed of flying but had been told they couldn't. The fight for equality in aviation wasn't over, but Olivia was no longer simply fighting to survive. She was thriving. And with each flight, with each challenge, she was carving out a space in the sky that would remain open for those who would come after her. The world was watching, and Olivia was ready to show them what was possible when barriers were broken and dreams took flight. As Olivia continued to break through the barriers that had once held her back, she became a source of inspiration for others, especially young women and minorities who had long been discouraged from pursuing careers in aviation. She began receiving messages from aspiring pilots, many of whom had faced similar challenges and had almost given up on their dreams. One day, while preparing for a flight from Denver to New York, Olivia sat in the crew lounge when a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Captain Williams," the young woman began, "I just wanted to thank you. You don't know how much it means to see someone like you in this industry. You've made me believe that maybe I can do this too." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You absolutely can," she replied. "This industry is for everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from. If you work hard, stay focused, and never stop believing in yourself, you'll get there. Just keep pushing forward." The young woman nodded, visibly moved by the conversation, and Olivia realized that she wasn't just flying planes. She was lifting others up as well. It wasn't long before Olivia was invited to speak at a pilot conference in Atlanta, an opportunity that would further amplify her message. The conference was an annual event, attended by pilots from all over the country, and Olivia knew that speaking there could be the catalyst for change in how women and people of color were perceived in aviation. The thought of standing before a crowd of experienced pilots, many of whom had once doubted her, made her nervous. But she knew that this was a moment she couldn't pass up. She prepared her speech with care, recounting her journey from the early days of training to her struggles with prejudice and the perseverance that had seen her through. On the day of the conference, as Olivia stepped onto the stage, she felt the weight of the room's gaze upon her. But instead of feeling intimidated, she felt empowered. She shared her story with passion, speaking not just about her own struggles, but about the need for inclusivity, diversity, and the importance of representation in aviation. As she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause, and Olivia couldn't help but smile. She had once been the only black woman in the room, but now her voice had helped pave the way for more to join her. As the months passed, Olivia's reputation as a trailblazer in aviation only grew. She continued to excel in her career, handling difficult flights with grace, earning respect from her colleagues, and pushing for systemic change within her airline. She also began mentoring young pilots, offering them the guidance and support she wished she had received when she first started. She created programs that would help aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds gain access to flight training and financial support. Olivia was no longer just a pilot. She was a leader, a role model, and an advocate for change in an industry that was slowly, but surely, beginning to evolve. When she looked back at the challenges she had faced, the prejudice she had encountered, and the obstacles she had overcome, Olivia realized that she had not only achieved her dream, but had transformed it into something far greater. She had carved a path for others to follow, and as she soared through the skies, she knew her journey was far from over. As Olivia flew her final route of the month, heading back to Atlanta, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short period of time. From the early days when she had been the only woman of color in the cockpit, enduring the subtle and overt prejudices, to now, when she was regarded as a leader and inspiration within the aviation community, Olivia had truly transformed her own destiny. The struggles had been real, and at times, they had seemed insurmountable. But the key had always been perseverance, believing in herself even when others didn't. And now, as she soared high above the clouds, the weight of those early challenges had been replaced by the pride of her accomplishments. Her hard work, dedication, and courage had allowed her to break down the barriers that had once seemed impossible to overcome. She had proved to herself and the world that nothing, not even prejudice, could keep her grounded. But Olivia's journey wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about making a difference for those who followed in her footsteps. She had become a symbol of change, showing that it was possible for anyone, regardless of race or gender, to succeed in the aviation industry. Her work with young pilots and the mentorship programs she had helped establish were the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Olivia knew that every time she helped an aspiring pilot take flight, she was not just teaching them how to handle an aircraft. She was teaching them that the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning. The foundation she had built was one that would continue to grow, and in years to come, the aviation world would see many more women and people of color in the cockpit, all inspired by her story and guided by the path she had paved. As Olivia landed the aircraft and made her way back to the hangar, she was greeted with the warm smiles of her colleagues, who now saw her not just as a fellow pilot, but as a pioneer in the industry. The once quiet nods and distant conversations had turned into genuine respect and camaraderie. Olivia knew that the fight for equality in aviation was far from over, but she had ignited a spark, and it was one that would continue to burn brightly for years to come. The skies were no longer reserved for a select few. They belonged to everyone, and Olivia Williams had proven that with enough determination, anyone could soar to unimaginable heights. As she left the airport, looking toward the horizon, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that her journey had just begun, and that the sky was no longer the limit for anyone. This concludes the story of Olivia Williams, the black female pilot who overcame the odds and soared above the challenges to become